In 2023, 1 million people visited these islands. 24,000 people actually live here. That's 40 tourists for every single resident, and that number keeps climbing. Most of those visitors stayed 5 days, photographed the same 3 viewpoints, and left believing they understood this place. This video is about what they missed. The physics of this place shouldn't work. Let's start with something that should be impossible. These islands sit at the 68th and 69th parallels north. To understand what that means, Murmansk, Russia, is at this latitude. So is the northern tip of Canada's Nunavut territory. Both are places defined by brutal, frozen winters, places where nothing should be able to thrive, and yet on the outer islands of Rust and Veroy, the average temperature stays above freezing for the entire year, every single month. Scientists call it one of the largest positive temperature anomalies ever recorded relative to latitude on Earth. Not just in Norway, not just in Europe, on the entire planet. 3 ocean currents converge here simultaneously: the Gulf Stream, the North Atlantic Current, and the Norwegian Current. The combined thermal energy they bring north is so immense that the sea surrounding Lofoten almost never fully freezes. In summer, it can reach 15 degrees Celsius, warm enough that locals actually swim, above the Arctic Circle. That warmth is also why there are surf breaks here. Unstad Beach, on the western edge of the archipelago, has held Arctic surf competitions in February. Competitors surfing overhead waves in near-freezing air, mountains dusted white, the sun barely cresting the horizon. It's one of the most genuinely surreal sporting images in the world. The name tells you what they saw. The name Lofoten is itself a clue to how people once perceived this place. In Old Norse, lo meant lynx, and fot meant foot or paw. When the earliest Norse sailors looked at the shape of this archipelago from the sea, this jagged, outstretched cluster of islands and rocks, they saw the paw print of a lynx. That image tells you something. These weren't people seeing a beautiful holiday destination. They were reading the land the way a hunter reads tracks. The shape of this coastline was a message about power, about danger, and about territory. And these mountains are genuinely ancient. The rock beneath your feet in Lofoten is over 3 billion years old, among the oldest exposed geology on the surface of our planet. The pyramids of Giza are roughly 4,500 years old. The dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. The bedrock of Lofoten predates both by a factor of time so large, it stops making sense. When you stand on a Lofoten beach, you're standing on a piece of the early Earth. The fish that built a continent. Every winter, between January and April, something extraordinary happens beneath the surface of the sea here. Millions of Arctic cod, called scry, migrate from the Barents Sea, traveling hundreds of kilometers to spawn in the waters around Lofoten. They choose this location because of those same ocean currents. The temperature and depth are precisely calibrated for their eggs to survive. Around 70% of all fish stocks in the entire Norwegian and Barents Seas use these waters to breed. That number is staggering. A single archipelago is the nursery for the majority of fish across 2 entire ocean regions. The people who settled here as far back as 6,000 years ago, when these islands were still covered in conifer forest, figured out something profound. You didn't need to go looking for the fish. The fish came to you every year, like clockwork. They turned that predictability into power. In the year 870, more than 1,150 years ago to be, a Norse chieftain named Torolf Kveldulfsson sailed to Lofoten, filled his ship with dried stockfish, sailed to England, and traded it for goods. That single transaction is the oldest recorded stockfish export in history. And it never stopped. The stockfish from these racks, fish split open and hung in the cold winter wind for 3 months until all moisture has left the flesh, eventually became the foundation of a national dish on the other side of Europe, Portugal. The Portuguese consume an estimated 20% of the world's cod supply. Their national dish, bacalhau, has over 1,000 known recipes. Almost all of that cod comes from Norway. Most of it originates in the waters off these islands. In the 1560s, the stockfish trade from northern Norway was worth 3 times the entire annual budget of the Norwegian state. 3 times. A fishing operation on a cluster of Arctic islands was worth more than the government itself. The byproducts that changed history. But the fish wasn't the only thing they were extracting. When the Vikings processed their cod here in winter, the livers didn't get wasted. They were boiled and rendered into oil, cod liver oil, which was collected in barrels and consumed throughout the dark Arctic months. The Vikings didn't know the word vitamin D, but they had empirically discovered across generations that consuming this oil during winter kept their children's bones straight and their warriors strong. Rickets, the bone-softening disease caused by vitamin D deficiency, devastated populations throughout medieval Europe wherever sunlight was scarce. Yet in Lofoten, where sunlight disappears almost entirely for months at a time, children remained healthy, not because of luck, because the cod livers from these waters contain some of the most concentrated natural sources of vitamin D on Earth. It's why the Lofoten Islands were called the Mecca of cod liver oil production in the early 20th century. And it's why cod liver oil from this specific island chain was designated as a daily supplement for all Norwegian school children in the early 1900s, a public health policy that had measurable, documented effects on the health of an entire nation. The vortex at the edge of the map. At the southern tip of the archipelago, between the island of Moskenesøy and the tiny rocky outcrop called Mosken, something happens to the water that defies intuition. The Moskstraumen, known to the rest of the world as the Maelstrom, is the most powerful tidal current in the world. Twice a day, as the tide shifts, enormous volumes of water are forced through a narrow, shallow channel. The seabed here drops and rises sharply. The water doesn't just flow, it spirals, it boils, it creates standing waves and rotating whirlpools that can reach several meters in height. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a horror story about it in 1841. Jules Verne used it as a climactic scene in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Herman Melville referenced it. The word maelstrom, now used in English to mean any overwhelming, chaotic situation, comes directly from this strait, from this exact stretch of water. Local fishermen have navigated it for generations, developing an intimate understanding of its precise rhythms. The window for safe passage is narrow, sometimes only a few hours a day. Boats that misjudge it have been dragged under. The whirlpools aren't mythological, they're real, and they're directly outside the living room windows of people who call this place home. What it costs to live here, around 24,000 people actually live here year-round, not seasonally, not as second homeowners, year-round, and what they live through is something that almost no YouTube video ever stops to describe honestly. From late November to mid-January, the sun doesn't rise above the horizon at all. For nearly 2 months, the archipelago receives no direct sunlight, not dim light, no sun. It's called the polar night, and locals have a word for the quality of light it creates. The blue-grey twilight glow around noon that's neither day nor dark. It's called mørketid, the darkness time. Then something equally extreme runs in the other direction. From late May to mid-July, the sun never fully sets. At midnight on June 15th, in Svolvær, the sun is still visible above the horizon, moving from left to right in a slow arc and not setting, just circling. Locals describe finding it almost impossible to feel tired. Children don't want to go to bed. The social rhythms of the entire island shift. You don't just visit Lofoten and understand this, you have to live it to feel what it does to you. And the community here is quietly in a negotiation with the outside world about what living here actually means. 1 million visitors, 24,000 locals. In 2023, an estimated 1 million tourists visited Lofoten, 1 million people, to visit a place that 24,000 people actually live in. That's roughly 40 tourists for every single resident. At peak summer weekends, the ratio is far higher. The consequences are things that rarely make it into the promotional content. Hikers with no equipment, no proper boots, no map, no water, attempting technical mountain routes in jeans and trainers and getting injured, local helicopters scrambling, local hospitals absorbing costs that can run into tens of thousands of dollars per rescue, residents unable to find parking outside their own homes, farmland roads blocked by rental cars, a 23% rise over 1 decade in how negatively local residents perceive tourism's impact on their own island. What's strange is that the tension isn't simple. The same fishermen who find strangers photographing them from the dock at dawn have also seen their children stay on the island instead of leaving for the mainland because there are now jobs in hospitality and guiding. The same community that feels overwhelmed also knows that without tourism, many small villages would have already emptied. It's a negotiation with no clean answer. The oil they chose not to drill beneath those waters, beneath the breeding grounds of half the fish in the Norwegian Sea, there are an estimated 1.3 billion barrels of oil. For decades, that number sat at the center of one of the most divisive political arguments in Norwegian history. Oil companies wanted access. Environmentalists said no. Fishermen were split. Some wanted the jobs and royalties, others knew that a spill during spawning season could devastate the cod population that their entire economy depends on. Norway, a country that has funded its welfare state through petroleum revenues for 50 years, was being asked to choose between its identity as an oil nation and its most visually iconic stretch of coastline. In 2019, after years of debate, the Norwegian Labour Party withdrew its support for exploratory drilling in Lofoten. That decision created a parliamentary majority against it. For now, the oil stays in the ground. But the debate isn't permanently settled. The oil is still there, the economics keep shifting, and the question, what is Lofoten worth compared to what's underneath it, has no final answer. The village at the end of the road. At the very end of the E10 highway, one of the most scenic roads in the world, stretching the full length of the archipelago, is a village called O. Its name is literally the last letter of the Norwegian alphabet. It's a coincidence of geography and linguistics that nowhere else on Earth can replicate. The road ends, the name ends, the land ends. Beyond Øy is only the maelstrom, the open Norwegian Sea, and the horizon. Inside that village is one of the last surviving 19th century cod liver oil factories in the world, still standing, still smelling of the sea and old timber. A wooden building where, for over a century, workers boiled livers in iron vats and poured the rendered oil into barrels that went to Europe and changed health outcomes for millions of people who never knew where the oil came from. And that building doesn't appear in most travel guides. It's not photogenic in the way that the mountains are photogenic. But it's arguably the most significant structure in the archipelago, a physical artifact of the economic engine that made all of this possible. Most places exist because of geography. Lofoten exists because of a very specific combination of things: ocean currents, fish migration patterns, volcanic geology, and the patience of people who learned to read all of it and build a life inside it. The tourists come for the peaks. They're magnificent. They deserve every photograph. But the peaks are just the frame. The picture is everything underneath: the 3-billion-year-old rock, the ancient trade routes, the darkness that shapes the people who stay, the fish that fed medieval Europe, the oil that no one can quite agree what to do with. 24,000 people live here. Ask any one of them what it's actually like, and they'll probably pause for a moment, the way people do when a question is both simple and somehow very hard to answer. The Lofoten Islands are proof that some places on Earth still feel untouched by time. From dramatic mountain peaks rising straight from the sea to quiet fishing villages surrounded by breathtaking scenery, this remote corner of Norway offers a glimpse into a world unlike any other. If you enjoyed exploring Lofoten with me, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next adventure. And let me know in the comments, would you visit the Lofoten Islands? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next journey.